Welcome to the Orange Pew. Hello and welcome to the March edition of the Orange Pew. We're so excited that you are with us. Now, before I say anything about where we're at in time or our guest, I have to say that the Orange Pew is produced by Jabber Productions. Jabber Productions is my son Joel. Today, this very day that we're recording, March 6th, because this is coming out on Sunday, is his birthday.
Wow.
And he's in the room.
No way.
It
Hey,
is.
Joel.
Totally.
Happy birthday, youngin.
So
Young
Joel's
Hamre.
turning 25 this year. And so he's right over there.
Getting
He's
old,
got,
dude.
He's got his little headset on and everything. So, hey, happy birthday, son. I love you. And thank you for
That's
producing
nice,
this for
Derrick.
Dad, because I would never be able to do this on my
that's
own.
nice. Happy birthday, Joel.
So, we're coming off of an amazing February in which we focused on local partners. And I was so excited about how many volunteers were released from CLA into our community. I think that was the strength. We actually didn't meet our financial goal, which is the first time in like ever for missions emphasis. But we had people volunteering for recovery centers and for advocate and for, I mean, it was amazing. So the strength was that we increased our subscription for Beyond Our Walls, and so thank you. Those who are part of CLA, thank you for being a part of the month of February. I hope you got one of these cards that help you pray for our 40 partners. Now, today, following that theme,
Come on.
we are very excited to have a friend, co-worker, sitting across from us on the Orange Pew, and it's Jason Ballard,
Yeah,
who's
Jay.
coming in to talk to us about The Way. It's a church plant that CLA was catalytic in, and so we're going to talk. Jason, welcome to the Orange
Jay.
Pew.
Thanks for having me.
How is the pew? Comfy.
People are critical of it. I like it.
Yeah,
there
they
might
are-
be just
they are
muscle
so
memory.
critical.
Okay, you said to us when you came in and sat on the Orange Pew that you were responsible for putting in the chairs. Tell us that story.
Okay, part of my testimony is I came to CLA in, I can't think about what year it is. So let's say I'm in grade 10 and I just become like, this is a couple years into being on fire for Jesus. And there's God's doing great things. There's evening services that are filled. The Spirit's moving. I didn't come from as charismatic of a church, but my youth pastor would drive me out here and it would be packed. I remember sitting in overflow. And I remember a few things. One is I remember seeing people get saved. Two, I remember seeing flags for the first time. And I remember the Orange Pews. And I also remember the impact it had on my heart. So
Flags.
like there was CLA, there was people getting saved, there was passion, the things of the Spirit, and Orange Pews.
And that was Fire and Freedom.
That was Fire and
Right.
Freedom.
And then you actually came back
Yes.
to,
I ended up working here years later.
yeah, you found your wife here.
Yeah, well, I came here because of I wanted a wife. I was at History
There you go.
Maker.
Hold it. But
CLA.
the story was that you actually installed the new seats in CLA.
Yes, that's right.
That you got rid of these orange
But it's
ones.
completely random. I was working here as like a youth
Intern.
or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Rach and I were dating or just got married, but I was at the stage where I needed more work than what the church was providing. So I was a hustler. And some random dude was like, hey, my buddy's installing new seats at a church called Christian Life Assembly. Do you want to work with him? He needs just labor.
So funny, Jay.
And I was like, yeah, I'll be there. And so I remember working like parts of my days with the youth team
Yeah.
and then going in there and like drilling. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Hopefully none of them have fallen out, but drilling holes, installing the new chairs.
You did a
and
good job.
It was great.
Solid.
Well, I'll tell you, they're a lot more comfortable than what you're sitting
They
in
sure
right
are.
now.
And it's nice though that you kept these as a nod to the story.
Well, and it makes for a great podcast.
And everywhere I go in Canada, like I get the privilege of visiting little churches all across Canada. There are still pews just like this, sitting in churches probably called Christian Life Assembly or something Tabernacle,
Right.
just like this. And so this is still part of the Canadian story.
Jay, I know Derrick introduced you, but I'm excited about you being with us today. I
Thanks
mean,
for having
the
me.
story of the way, the evolution of the Pastorate, which is called now. Love to hear this. What's happened in Vancouver? I think it's just magnificent.
So let's start with a little introduction to those who are maybe new to CLA or new to POC Network and don't know you.
Yeah.
Tell us how you got connected to CLA,
Yeah.
how you met your wife, And you were actually working with me here
Yeah.
at CLA when we sent the team. So just briefly introduce yourself.
So my story with ministry got started because shortly after I became a follower of Jesus, I was caught up in like a movement in the Tri-Cities, Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, Coquitlam, of youth groups working together and then high school students leading prayer groups and outreach and service and justice projects in the school. So by the time I'm in grade 9, my faith has just come alive. I'm in this ecosystem where every Wednesday morning we're meeting before school to pray. Every Friday morning, there's a citywide prayer meeting at 6 a.m. of youth leaders from different churches and high school kids praying. And I'm often, no exaggeration, falling asleep on the floor of this church basement, waking up to the sounds of other students and youth leaders crying out for their friends to know Jesus. I mean, it really marked my whole person.
Mm.
And so I thought my trajectory will be towards redemptive entrepreneurship in the business space. So I went to SFU to study business. And I really want to do that to reach people far from God, to build the church in the broadest sense of the church.
Right.
But somewhere in the middle of my undergraduate, I found myself speaking a lot at youth groups, really about living your life on mission with Jesus. And then churches, and then being involved with a nonprofit that's helping high school students do similar things as I was doing, prayer groups and outreach. And before I knew it, I remember discerning, I think I'm meant to do pastoral ministry with my life. And one of the interesting things that happened early on, I was very much in what some would call the parachurch space.
Yeah.
But I couldn't shake this feeling that I must be deeply planted in a local church. And that if I was to do parachurch, that I would do it with one foot firmly planted local church. And my time at CLA afforded me the opportunity to be deeply involved with Alpha, but also have meaningful pastoral involvement here. And that's not for everybody, but that's always been a must for me. It couldn't be like serve the church from a distance. It had to be do it on the ground, and then by God's grace, support other churches really based on what we're learning. And so to kind of make a longer story short, I was leading this organization called Campus Fire, and then we wanted to build a resource for high school students.
Mm-hmm.
So we started working with Alpha.
Yes.
Pitched this idea of like, because I love Alpha. I know this church loves Alpha.
We just finished
Really?
our last Alpha last night.
Nice.
The day that we're recording this. And one of my favorite memories, by the way, of you was when you and Doug and I went to London.
Yes, that was so fun. And Joel.
And
Levi.
We took Joel and Levi. Yeah.
Oh,
that
so
was
good.
So much
I think
fun
we lost
walking.
Joel. We lost Joel and Levi for about 3
Yeah,
days. But
for some reason they didn't want to hang out with the three of us at a
That's
church
okay.
conference, but it's
No.
fine.
No, and so you were catalytic, of course, to bringing Alpha to CLA and Alpha Youth,
Yeah.
which you wrote and produced and directed, and
Yeah.
so you were huge in
Yeah,
in
and I
that.
think it was I don't know the exact year, but there was a point in the story where I had been actually on staff at CLA for a number of years, and then transitioned off and was still attending here, doing lots of work with Alpha. And my father-in-law Brent was the lead pastor before a year. Fred Falford did the transition in the middle. Shout out Fred.
Yep.
And
love Fred.
I came here really to date the pastor's daughter. And so they had a youth kind of internship, $500 a month. I ran the youth group for a summer, and I was very happy to do it. And
How old were you?
oh man,
Were you in university or?
yes, I was in my second or third year of my undergrad.
Okay.
Studied at SFU, and so I ended up moving out here, found roommates,
Yeah.
and then would just commute out to Burnaby. Did the youth ministry here. That was a really sweet season. It was super fun. Rach and I got married. I remember telling the preteens that Rach and I were getting married, and one of the because I was leading preteens at the time, one of the preteens asked, like, "Does that mean you're going to leave?" And I'm like, "Who hurt you? No, no, I'm not going anywhere."
Right.
It was so sweet. And then I don't know, I think it was probably just because of the work of Alpha sort of ramped up for a little bit. I found myself transitioning out of work here. But then it was after you stepped in, Derrick, to lead that
You came back. You were
Yeah,
halftime Alpha. Halftime
yeah, exactly.
here.
We sat down. You asked me. We went to Cactus Club, and you said, "Hey, we'd love to make room for you here and we'll ebb and flow with you." And that invitation was so generous to me because that's what I wanted, was to be firmly involved with life. And I didn't want to just train other people to do youth ministry. I wanted to be doing it and that be integrated. So I think over the course of a number of years, not less than 4, I would kind of ebb and flow from 10 hours a week to 20 hours a week, 30 hours, depending what was going on in the alpha world.
Right.
And that was a really beautiful season here. And then I remember sitting down with you when you first started thinking about a church plant.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking this isn't the right time for me. But that was a really big part of my discernment journey of going, oh, there's something alive in my heart. And so, you guys planted another church before we ended up planting The Way. And that was exciting to watch and learn from. But this church, both of you guys, have shaped my pastoral imagination so much. There's so many things we do at The Way that me and Jeremy, who's also was the pastor here for a long time, we always just sort of wink at each other and we're like, thank you for CLA for teaching us that. Like we do our sort of equivalent of Missions Month in October. We call it Month of Generosity. Yeah. And we do that because of what we witnessed at CLA. And one kind of cool thing, I know we're not supposed to talk about numbers and because we're too Canadian to sound bodacious or braggadocious, I should say. Not bodacious, braggadocious, cocky. We've been able to give away over $500,000
Wow.
to other organizations.
Amazing.
And the reason why I say that is because this church invested significantly in The Way Church, like real amounts of money. But I think it's important, especially a lot of people who give think about investment. They think about investments in their personal stewardship, but then also in their giving stewardship. And although that's just one metric of many, that doesn't include the people who've come to know Jesus, the lives that have changed. In the kingdom of God, there is a multiplying effect. And that's just like one little example of like, this church invested money and time and effort and heart and people. But part of that result has been we could take what we learn and invite more people into that. And so there's a real multiplying effect. Like all that money you guys just raised in the month of missions emphasis will find its way on different soils. And some of those soils will bear profound fruit. So there's the total number, and then there's all that result.
Great encouragement, Jason. Thank you.
We want to get into the church plant. We had a season, maybe 6 years or so before we got back into campus multiplication. But we launched Resonate Church out in the Tri-Cities, and then Citizens Church in Surrey with good friend.
The other Jason.
Yeah, good friend of yours, Jason Eliason. And we were just in a season believing God for young leaders like you and Eliason and Shane and just believing God raise up a new generation to plant churches in, like we acknowledge, one of the toughest places in North America, right? Vancouver. So when you and Jeremy came to me, and I know Chris was involved in that Holy Trinity, but you're like, we want to do this. I'm like, and it was Vancouver.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the Tri-Cities. You know, it wasn't Surrey. It was, we want to do this in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, you guys can do this.
Wow.
You are gifted, unusually gifted in pastoral leadership. And you talk about, sending money and people. People was the hardest.
Yeah.
Sending your very best.
It's such a sacrifice.
I'm thinking of people right now in my mind that are no longer here. But I was so excited. So tell us how that vision captured your heart and started. And then we're going to talk about COVID.
Yeah, that's a big part of our story.
That was crazy season.
Yeah, I love meeting people who are like, they have COVID babies. Like there's people that are referred to as like a baby born in COVID. Our church is a COVID baby.
Yeah.
I remember going downtown in the 2010 Olympics. I think I lived in Port Coquitlam at the time, or maybe I had just moved to Langley. And I remember going downtown with buddies. We never got tickets to the events, but we would go to wherever the outdoor sort of viewing were and just the energy of the city during that time. And I remember the first thoughts of going, like, you have these thoughts that don't feel like God thoughts at the time. Just a thought. I think maybe I'll plant a church with some friends in 2020 in Vancouver. You put that away.
Wow.
And so for over a decade, even amongst some friends, we would joke about, in 2020 when we plant a church, but there was no plan. And then somewhere around 2016, 17, conversations here about planting citizens were happening. And Jeremy and myself and our buddy Chris were swirling around this idea. And then progressively up until about 2019, it went from maybe we will to are we doing this, to seasons of prayer and fasting and discernment, talking to mentors, to we're doing this. But I have to say, and you know, we had an audacious vision to not just plant a church, but a church multiplying church that would be multi-site in the city. Yeah. And not everyone had the same enthusiastic response as you, Derrick, of going, I see it. Let's give it a go. And so we really cherished those conversations. And there was part of it too that was unconventional, that we felt like we were meant to do it as team.
Yes.
And now on the other side, we've worked out the governance. We've worked out the structure that makes that possible. Yeah. But it started with a conviction and a real story that we were trying to honor. And before we had the strategy fully worked out, a few people like yourselves and others said, hey, you'll work it out, but we see this. And that meant a lot. And so a bunch of us moved down in 2019. I think I ended my time as staff here, maybe May 2019, was able to move to Vancouver of November of 2019. We started a few small groups in the city. We noticed those small groups were not insular, but it was early on, we saw the sort of signs that people were excited about a flavor of church, but there wasn't a deep conviction for the mission of engaging neighbor and friend. And so we shut down those small groups and we started an alpha in early of 2020. And so we trained the team, we started praying for our neighbors and friends at school, and we started inviting people to alpha. And we do our very first sort of alpha ever, and we get pizza and we rent a little church building. People show up. It's going really, really well. And then week 3, all the restrictions. Yeah. And so that's, February, March window of 2020. The plan was in April to start meeting with what we call the launch team that would sort of start meeting and doing training and development for a September launch. So all this stuff was pre-stuff, but there is that moment where we're like, what are we going to do? Do we get the timing wrong? All those things.
And we didn't know how long.
Exactly. Early on, you're like, is this 3 weeks?
I remember standing in front of a camera and telling CLA, we'll be back for Easter. So I just thought it would be
a month,
spring
couple
break.
Weeks.
Yeah. And then there was no Easter.
It was such a disorienting time too, because you're hearing all these mixed messages. I did get a text from a really thoughtful Australian pastor who texted a few people going, heads up, I think this will be 2 years and there'll be full lockdown.
Wow.
And I didn't necessarily think, oh, he's right. But in the back of my mind, we started asking this question, if that's true, would we still go forward? And it took us about 2 days. I know it sounds funny to say 2 days to go from, if that is the case, would we keep going to, no, the Lord has us here for a specific time?
Yeah, tell us about that, because you did keep going. Yeah. You despite COVID, you thought, no, we're going to move forward. Yeah. And so obviously it changed some things.
Radically.
You were online and not live, but tell us how it started.
Yeah, so we decided, so we had these individuals saying, yes, we want to plant this church with you. And so this is a mix of a lot of people from CLA, from Chris's Church, Calvary Baptist in Coquitlam, and other people we knew, and saying yes to being part of it.
And just to add in, so Jeremy was the young adult pastor here, and there were a whole group of young adults in his pipeline that joined you. And next month, by the way, we're interviewing CLA's young adult pastor, Matt Bender.
Sweet.
Who actually was on that team.
Yeah, he came.
He came, right?
And so there's a good mix of people who are saying, yeah, I'm going to go and give this a go for a year. We asked them like, hey, there's 2 paths here. One is you do it for a year, and then maybe you go back to exactly where you started. Like, because we knew not everyone's going to be able to even afford to be in the city. You got to be, to say yes to a city like Vancouver, you got to kind of know why you're there. And so, but we did ask people for a commitment, being like, hey, we want to build together. And so looking back in retrospect, there was a number of people who really did a year or 2, and then in a very healthy way transitioned back to the city they're from, which is positive. And then a number of people said, no, we're here. We're going to figure it out in the city. And so we had this launch team. So we're like, what are we going to do? Well, let's start training them. So we started meeting every Sunday on Zoom. On Easter Sunday 2020 is our first time meeting, and that was a launch team. And we trained them on, here's our theology, philosophy, and practice on small groups, prayer ministry, gifts of the Spirit, generosity, missions, youth, next
Fantastic.
gen. We were a little bit overkill. We had a lot of thinking that had gone into it. There's like 21 weeks or whatever it was of launch training. And then all the while we're like, maybe things will open up by the time we start. But by the time we're in summer, we're like, this is an online start. And I think God's kindness, a couple things was evidence of God's kindness. One, I spent a lot of time with pastors who were transitioning churches in that time. And so you're asking people who met in person for prayer meetings, who met in person for small groups, to now do that online.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that at all.
Mhm.
Not one person said, I liked the way small groups better in
Right.
person.
They had no other.
There was no other
experience.
option.
Yeah.
So there was a unique grace to us. You
Mm.
know, it's like, I think it's harder to
That's good.
steward a growing church or a church with some vision like CLA through a season like COVID than it is to start. Now, we don't need to compare, but it's like there can be this, how do you start it during that time? I'm like, man, I'll tell you what's really hard. Keeping a church unified who are trying to hold on to something from the past, are trying to navigate. Like, we didn't have anyone go, like, we didn't have debates about masks and stuff like that. I mean, the
Right.
people joining the church were the kinds of people who are early adopters, who are in the city. I mean, it was just very different dynamics. We had our fight for unity as well. But then the other thing it forced us to do was identify godly leaders, I'd say deacons in the New Testament language,
Mhm.
and empower them to disciple small groups. So online, some people, remember when you could walk outside with a group of 6 or whatever. So anytime a restriction went, if we could release and empower people to prayer walk, to do discipleship. So all of a sudden, instead of putting on a Sunday, which is a big part of church, and it's a good thing, we are asking the question, how do we identify leaders who can go with a few?
Yeah.
It forced us to start praying more because it was one of the things we could do was walk around and pray. But then we did Alpha online.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time hearing the story of the Alpha, like the Holy Spirit sessions on Alpha, and someone describing waiting in silence on Zoom for the Spirit of God to fall and watching a young man who'd walked away from God get touched by the Spirit of God and begin to weep in his room by himself
Mhm.
across a Zoom screen.
Yeah, awesome.
That story was catalytic for us. Not that we didn't have a theology for God showing up in another room, that when we pray here, the Spirit of God's obviously alive in another room. We had a theology for it, but now we've seen it.
Mhm.
And so then every time online we said, come Holy Spirit, there was like that picture in my mind. He can touch somebody right now.
Great.
So Alpha online, kids ministry online, small groups online, we just went for it. And our whole team was like, let's give it a go. And then I remember the first time we got to meet in person.
Yeah. So that would have been now the next year, right?
Yeah, so in the summer following, call it summer 2021, we were allowed to do very, very limited gatherings. And so we did a couple evening worship nights. And I remember even some of the restrictions, like, are you allowed to sing or not? It was just so bizarre.
Was that the 50s? Like, were you allowed 50
Yes,
people?
that kind of
or-
thing.
Yeah.
Big enough room, spaced out. But then September 2021 was the first time we ever met as a church in person on a Sunday morning.
And where did God lead you? Like, how did you find a place to meet? And,
That was very hard. We had a spreadsheet of almost 100 venues
wow.
that we would ask and inquire of, and we were looking for, you start with your big list of reasonable space. It'd be great to have a lobby for people to meet and connect, value of hospitality, room for kids ministry, but really quickly you go, we're not going to get all of our things.
Mhm.
God led us to a neighborhood that wasn't on the top of our list, not because it's not a beautiful neighborhood, it just wasn't where we thought we were being led to. But this venue opened up. In retrospect, we see God's very kind, profound hand leading us to this neighborhood. We love being part of the community of Strathcona. It is where God led us. We just didn't necessarily have eyes to see it originally. And so we found ourselves in this old church building that's got like 100 years of history. It's been owned by Catholics, Presbyterians, Foursquares. It's got a rich history in that neighborhood. And the first Sunday, they let me preach. I don't preach a ton at the way, only about 5, 6, 7 times a year. But I preached on the first Sunday, and I remember saying, these are all the churches that have been here before us. And in 100 years, it's very possible no one will remember the Way Church. But the Church of Jesus will be doing just fine in Vancouver.
Hmm.
And that's been our heart the whole time. Now, like CLA, we're praying for decades of fruit
sure.
and all those things. But there's something about being in that building that is a prophetic picture of what we want to be. We want to be part of the story of his church in a place. We want to steward in our generation. But we don't want to build the way. We want to play our part in what the kingdom of God is doing.
Okay, so we're going to exit COVID now. And
Yeah.
at that season, by God's grace, I was sitting on the board
Yes.
of The Way.
Thanks for
with you.
doing
So
that, by the way.
got to watch you guys in this stage. And a really interesting thing happened in North Vancouver that all of a sudden opened up. I don't know that you were looking for it, but it happened out of relationship.
Yep.
And it gave you a location.
Yes.
I know that Strathcona was a location, a
Yep.
rented location, and you're still there.
Still there.
Right?
Yeah,
but
I love
this
it there.
other location wasn't going to be rented.
No.
And so tell us this miracle
Yeah.
story that took place and launched you into North Vancouver.
So sometime in the middle of the 1900s, my grandma and grandpa immigrate from Scotland, and they end up at Knight Road Bible Chapel, which is a Brethren church. And there's a whole network of Brethren churches. And some of the families that they met there were part of a church in North Van called Sutherland, which has Brethren roots. When we merged with them, it wasn't formally a Brethren church.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my grandma and grandpa's best friends was called Betty Kopp. And her son, James, was the lead elder of Sutherland.
Hmm.
And Ross and Carol Pilgrim, who were also on the board there, were in my grandma and grandpa's small group way back in the day. Wow. So they find themselves in COVID without a pastor, a congregation. It's hard to actually say how big it was because it's just such a disorienting time.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there's 50 people connected in some way, maybe 20 to 40 in attendance when they'd gather. And they're just really stumped. And we had this whole sort of arsenal of people wanting to serve and not a lot we could do. Yeah. So we actually started helping a number of churches in any way we could. Do you need help getting online? Do you need help like filming talks? Do you need help? We just started helping churches because, and so this is one of the churches. So I met James actually. James came by for coffee. We're wearing masks, and me and Jared, Chris are just happy to see someone. And he starts saying about their story. And then over a year, they went through this journey of going, I think that we're meant to merge with the church. And they candidated a few churches. And they asked us to consider talking about merger. And, you know, I'm telling the board, like, this is the next conversation. And the long story short is we merge. Yeah. And in order to plant the Way North Vancouver. And so we started doing that pre-training like we did before. And now we have 20 to 30 Sutherland members, most of whom are over the age of 50 or 60. And most of them are still in the church today. It's incredible. Amazing. It's incredible. And then about 30 of our people hived together. A lot of them were already living in North Vancouver, hived together to start a new expression. And Jeremy has been pastoring that congregation for the last number of years.
Now, Jeremy King went over there first to just help them with worship, right?
Yeah, just to help. I mean, so we were early on when we had Sundays going in North Vancouver and Strathcona. The church was small enough, you know, under 500 people. We had a big pastoral team. We were kind of able to hold the whole thing under a central pastoral leadership team with location-specific coordinators, site coordinators, kids support, that kind of thing. Yeah. But it became very clear a few years ago that needs a localized pastor. And Jeremy kindly said, hey, I'll give a good chunk of my time to shepherding that congregation. But next Sunday, we hire our first full-time site pastor. A wonderful, wonderful guy called John LaFave who's come with his wife, Joanna, and kids. And it's a huge step forward. And part of it is, you know, when we first gathered downstairs there in this building that we inherited, maybe there was 50 people. I think last Sunday there would have been 350, more than 50 kids. Wow. It's two services. You know, they're running Alpha, graduating people from Freedom Session. It's a vibrant, growing church.
And is this new leader going there?
Yeah.
Yeah, to take over that.
Yeah, I had the chance to attend a couple times in the basement.
Yeah.
I remember. If you can find us,
if you can find us,
you know, come.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It was a special time.
Yeah.
And so, and so then all of a sudden we become a multi-site church.
Yes, yeah.
And
that was the original vision.
It was always in our heart to do two things, not just to be multi-site, but to be multi-site for the purpose of revitalization of older churches and for the purpose of reaching neighborhoods. So the idea is the more and more time we spend in Vancouver, the more we notice that a church in Commercial Drive is uniquely set up to make disciples in that neighborhood. And that's not to say people do commute from all over. We're not trying to overemphasize that. But an opportunity for churches in our time is to, in a city like Vancouver, or any place, I know you guys are doing this as well, to use multi-site as a way to raise up leaders, to have localized expression of mission while benefiting from the strength of leadership that can come from pooling your resources and working together. And so we felt called to that, but we didn't want to rush into it. The timeline was expedited a ton. And now we have this building that we were being able to fundraise to renovate for. And, you know, we barely feel like owners of it. We hold it so open-handed, like we almost like freely we've received, freely we want to give. And so we want to make it better. We want to invest in that space. It's rented out by other churches, a Farsi speaking church, an Anglican church. It's used midweek by like different groups in the community, like an arts and creative group. And it's just so wonderful to see that. And we're praying that God would open doors for us to have property in the city of Vancouver.
Amen.
Which would be,
Wow.
it could only be a miracle.
Wow.
But we've seen this. So we're thinking, okay, Lord, in your timing.
You had other sites too.
Yeah.
Some that became more permanent, and some that didn't work.
Yeah.
I loved the willingness. I mean, there's a couple things I appreciate about your leadership. One is your humility. You walk softly, open-handedly, but you're also willing to experiment.
Yeah.
And go, okay, what might work? And so
Part of that's just actually a flaw in my personality that God's redeemed. I have ADHD and I like change. And so part of me is like, God's redeeming it, but part of it's also, there's a shadow side there, but I appreciate your framing of it.
Well, I think you've experimented really well. I love it. I like to experiment too, but I think, you tell us about some of the sites that you were excited about, and then maybe it didn't work. And
Yeah.
how did you feel about that?
So thankfully, when it comes to locations, like we, as a leadership team, we started discerning that we should have an expression as close to UBC as possible to engage university students. But the venue has just been incredibly difficult. So we've started and stopped that gathering a number of times, mostly because of venue changes.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I was just there again this Sunday speaking. I don't speak there a ton. And Rachel, now Matson, used to be Souza, who came from CLA as well, is an apprenticing pastor who oversees that congregation. And it's growing. We're settled in a long-term venue in Fairview, which is a wonderful neighborhood with a good partnership with the church that hosts it. It's an evening service. A year ago, we were in a neighborhood called West Point Grey, way closer to UBC.
Yes.
That venue, access to that venue wrapped up. And so we had to pause for the summer. But this is the most stable it's ever been. So in that one, it's really been one of these stories of like, I think that it has, I don't even know if discouraging is the right word. It definitely hasn't been without its like, wow, that's an objective bummer. But there's something about being in a place where God, it's impossible for us to take on our shoulders finding a facility in this city.
Yes.
So if you haven't given us a facility by the summer, then maybe we're not supposed to do church this summer in the evening. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
The church isn't shutting down, but maybe so there's been these moments of finding comfort in the impossibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, where we should land with people's souls and salvation is like, we cannot make that move. So you can be passionate, you can do all the work possible in your care, and then somehow go, okay. And so I think that's been the journey. And then staying unified as a team is hard throughout that as our team is growing the congregation. So it's just demanded good communication, but we're in a really stable place for that evening service. Similar with office spaces, we meet in another old church that's been renovated in downtown Vancouver on 1155 Thurlow in Davie Village. And it's our midweek ministry center. We can't do Sundays there. And again, like, it's a miracle. We have parking spaces in downtown Vancouver. Like, I never thought we'd ever be able to have secure parking, but our staff can park underground and have office space. And it's quirky, and we're working within the constraints of a shared space. But it's been an incredible gift. And that's where we run the Way College as well. And so that's been a real gift to be able to have a secure enough space downtown where we can train people to be future ministers.
Yeah. I want you to tell us about the college. So right now, how many sites is the Way?
5 congregations in 3 locations. So North Vancouver, there's 2 morning services. We see those as unique congregations. That's how we're trying to pastor and cultivate them. 2 in Strathcona, and then Fairview in the evening, which has an emphasis towards, it's not exclusively for, but an emphasis towards university students. It doesn't have kids ministry or anything like that.
And that original group that went during COVID and started meeting is now what? What would you say is the size of influence?
That's a good question. Do you guys have a ratio here from Sunday attendance to total? Like, it's always hard to know.
Yeah, 50%.
Yeah, so we would have around just under 1,000 people showing up on a Sunday at our sites.
Mm-hmm. So maybe 2,000 people being influenced.
Yeah, and then we have a metric that I can't remember what we call it, maybe core, and it's on who's regular giving or regularly serving or has attended X number of small groups in the last couple of weeks, and that's over 1,200 people, I think. I don't want to. Pastors, we do hyperbole.
Amazing, that's amazing.
But it's a growing, and what's been really cool is like early years, big growth in giving and growth in the congregation has settled into like 10 or 15% a year. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing that we get excited about, because then you can multiply a site in God's timing. We've also been able to help plant one church. And so there was a revitalization of an older church in Mount Pleasant called Mount Pleasant Baptist. The denomination that Chris was part of was able to send a future planter to spend a year with us. And then we were able to, we were just a piece of it. So we don't want to take too much credit. He had so much resourcefulness and other connections. Part of the piece of the puzzle was us being able to send him and send a few people. And they have a growing congregation now. And so that's really special too. So our heart for the city is, yes, sites, but also to plant churches. And so we just did our annual community meeting a few weeks ago. And we were reporting growth in giving, growth in baptisms, growth in attendance of Alpha, growth in attendance on Sundays, growth in core. But I did want to say if we report in a given year that all these numbers are not growing, that's not necessarily a sign of, I don't think there's failure in the kingdom, but like that's, like I get excited for the day where we get to do what you guys did, which is take the hit of sending your best. And then what you guys have seen, which is so encouraging, is new people move to Langley. New people get invited to church. New people step up. Like this fundamental identity of the church as ascending people, I think isn't just core to who we are. I think it's core to how we are blessed as a church. I think we, just like tithing, giving, it's like when we do this, we experience God's blessing. Like
we throw numbers out, like the numbers that you just said, Jay, are like in my heart, I'm just like, it's grace. I don't even want to use the word, but it's a miracle.
It is.
Like from the first thing that you said, I've had a little bit of experience with church planting, and I don't know if people who've never church plant before understand that even when you said we decided to move to Vancouver, like if someone's watching in our network in the POC, to move from Langley to Vancouver, that in itself takes like a pioneer heart and spirit. And, I have young, students that come and go like, I'm going to church plant and I'm going to go for it. I'm like, are you sure?
It's hard work.
Because it takes everything that you have.
It also does a number on your
blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, it does a number on your, it's not just, it's the blood, the sweat, and the tears, and it's the mental, spiritual game, a fight.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been more aware of my insecurities, how little faith is really there at times. I still have Sundays where I'm like, this is the Sunday where no one comes.
Yeah.
Like in my body, I have this feeling that this is the Sunday no one shows up.
And then summer comes and you're like, we're done.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just, Jay, whenever I think of Hear the Way, and even I hope we can talk about the Pastorate, because I download every episode and listen, and I'm so blessed by your leadership, the Triad's leadership. I just think it's a story of grace, and especially around church planting, it just takes, it's easy for us to talk about it, but I just want people to understand it takes your spirit and soul to do it.
Yeah, you're very kind.
And it just but it's the best thing ever.
It
Like
was,
you look back at this, Jay, and it's just
well, I couldn't say no. I
Mhm.
felt the same way when we did the first Alpha Youth series. Like there are those moments in your life. I don't think it's normative, but there are seasons. Let me put it on the flip side. Most of our life is faithful obedience to God.
Right.
There's not a feeling that I must provide for my family today. It's like, no, this is what I must do. I'm going to be a husband, a father, others listening, a wife, a mother, a neighbor, a friend. Like it's faithfulness to God. I'm going to steward what he's given me. But then every once in a while, there are these things where you're like, I can't not do it. There is like a fire inside of me. And I felt that way with the Alpha Youth series. No one could stop me in a sense.
Mhm.
And the early days of the church plant were that. If I'm to be vulnerable, this season, 5 years in, I don't have that same white hot why that you can't stop me.
Mm.
And so now, so early on the prayer walks, I felt like I'm a missionary in the city. God's put me here.
Mhm.
God bless these streets.
Yeah.
Set that person free. I'm like, well, now it doesn't feel as electric. And those prayer walks feel like rule of life stuff,
Mm.
faithful obedience. God, I don't feel it today, but I want to pray again, bless these streets. I pray again. And something happens when 5 years in, you've seen God move, but also those same streets you've been praying for are still marked by brokenness, rebelling against God,
Mhm.
people disenfranchised from family and support. And so I'm really, to be honest, in a season where I don't have this deep white hot why you can't stop me, but I also sense God's called me here still.
Mhm.
And learning to serve God in both those seasons is the growth edge for me right now.
Mhm.
Is how do I cultivate a spirituality with God that can weather both seasons?
Mhm.
It's the difference between church planting and pastoring.
Yes.
And those aren't the same,
Mm-hmm.
but you're the same.
Yeah.
You were the church planter in partnership, obviously, with others, but now you're the pastor.
And he's changed me.
Sure.
Like I feel like if you asked me what a pastor was 5 years ago, I might have said the same thing, but my goodness, the words that I say when I say shepherd mean different things.
Mhm.
I want to do a few things before we end here, and there's lots that we could say, but an important part of your soul is leadership development. It's a beautiful part of your heart, and so out of that passion came the Way College. Explain what that is,
Yeah.
and why it exists.
We wanted to do our part to see more ministers for the future of the church in Canada. And not just more, but called, equipped, courageous, orthodox, grounded in scripture, able to respond to the unique challenges of our time. And so we felt like one of the ways that we could do that was to bring high quality Bible college education, not just biblical knowledge and classroom experience, but the spiritual formation, the practical learning, and try to put it in the context of two places. One is in the heart of our church. And so can we train a few ministers through the college that are also caught up deeply in the life of the church, and then also in the context of the city of Vancouver. And so we really don't feel like our Bible college is meant to be an alternative to many wonderful, beautiful Bible colleges. I'm referring people all the time to places like Summit. We're asking for people, hey, if being in a city like Vancouver and part of a church like The Way feels like the right environment for you in a smaller cohort to prepare to be a minister, then come spend a year or 2 or 4 with us. They can walk away with a degree. It's through a meaningful partnership with an organization called Kairos. That's an American college. We're really hoping for a Canadian partner in the right timing. But in lots of ways, it looks like a Bible college experience, classrooms, lectures, practicum. And it's just been beautiful to see the people that God has brought. And there's kind of a dual sort of layer to it. One is there's these full-time students. So coming next year, maybe there's like 30 full-time students in the first 3 years. But then we get to open up some of the classes to our church, to other churches in our community, and do part-time studies or one-off. So even in the summer, Daryl Johnson's teaching an intensive on the Gospel of John.
I'm coming.
It's awesome, right? And what's cool is we can offer it at a price that's really, really affordable, but it's the same quality teaching as you would get even at a master's level, but made accessible to even lay people. And then Chris is teaching contemporary ethics and worldview, addressing things like medical assistance in dying, AI, gender and identity. And these are issues we're dealing with on the ground.
Yeah.
And so those classes are, yes, for our full-time students, but part of the strategy was also to create an environment that could serve and support the broader church community at the Way and beyond. And so that's been a real pioneering work. I think we're still pioneering. I've started a lot of things. This is a hard one to start. I'm really happy with what we're delivering. And then the question we need to figure out at this point is, how do we help the right people get there? Because the city of Vancouver is just such a difficult city to afford to live in. So we pray for housing or creative solutions, because we feel like, in the same way as like the mountain of Summit or going to Briarcrest out in the middle of Saskatchewan is a unique formative experience. There's another formative experience of being in an urban center, and those have different advantages, different things that form you. But we're seeing again and again that the city is such a difficult place for somebody to make a go in, especially while they're studying. So we're really wrestling with that, and we're just on the journey and just trying to discover, like, God, I think you're in this. I think we're meant to do this, and let's figure it out. And it's still alive, and we're welcoming another class of like 10 to 15 students next September.
It's amazing to mix biblical, doctrinal, studies with apprenticeship. It's just beautiful. Now, a number of times today, you've talked about the broader, your call to the broader Church of Jesus Christ. So it started in prayer when you were a student in high school, and then Alpha obviously was that, and now there's a part of you, that isn't the pastor of the Way. It's the quarterback of a much broader network through podcast and training called the Pastorate. And I want you to tell us about what that is, because that's a really Canadian unique, I think, call upon your life that you are operating in, and it's beautiful.
It's amazing.
That's very, very encouraging and kind. So around the same time we started the Way, we registered another charity. At the time, it was called the Canadian Church Leaders Network. And really, we were responding to a couple challenges we saw. One was younger pastors, you guys work with a lot of them, not having a clear plot point of discovering what does it mean to be a pastor, and not really having a clear path to longevity, a high attrition rate, a high burnout or even failure rate, unfortunately. And then chatting with denominational leaders across the board going, we have like a high vacancy rate here of people ready to step into senior roles of leadership. So saw that challenge, but then also saw God work in a unique way. And we try to ask the question, how might we not train pastors in the way that a Bible college can, or life in the local church, or like those hard skills, but how might we craft the heart and soul, or care for the heart and soul of pastors that could lead to faithfulness, longevity, and fruitfulness in ministry for decades to come? And so we started experimenting with different things. And now, as the Pastorate, we've locked into like 3 things that we want to do that cares for the hearts of pastors and helps set them up for decades of fruitful, joy-filled, integrity-filled ministry. But then also that's distinctly Canadian. Mm-hmm. We say for the Pastorate, we're for pastors. Like, who is this for? It's for pastors. Not just church, not Christian leaders broadly, pastors. We're for the church. We just really believe that the best shot for a city like Langley or Vancouver or Merritt or Kamloops or wherever it is, the best shot, Souk, for that city is vibrant, Jesus-centered, faithful churches. So we're for the local church, and we're for Canada. And one of the things we get to do is tell Canadian stories. In fact, just 2 days ago, we were at one of our pastors' retreat. So we take pastors away, often with their spouses. And
to a real dump.
Yeah, to a little dump called Barnabas, one of the most beautiful places on the West Coast, amazing food. Daryl was doing ministry, and it's spacious. It's time to connect. There's prayer ministry. It was beautiful, but I snuck a few of them away to do some interviews and got to interview the pastor of Christian Life Assembly in Gibsons.
Oh, yeah.
Got to interview a brand new pastor here in Langley from Town and Field who just started 6 months ago. and got to interview a pastor who succeeded his dad in the heart of Montreal, a French-speaking church. And these are stories which otherwise, I mean, these are faithful people. CLA in Gibson's over 80 years old.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to share those stories because somehow we can find ourselves as Christians in Canada and as church leaders in Canada feeling like we're in this small, like hidden thing, minority, and we can kind of lose ourselves in the global conversation. But it's like, no, there are so many examples of faithful men and women leading churches, dynamic churches, all across Canada. And most of them you'll never hear from on a podcast or whatever because they're too busy just loving their congregation and doing the thing in front of them.
Yeah.
And we kind of feel like one of our great honors is bringing awareness to the Canadian church story. And then through those different things, inviting people into long-form cohorts. So we do one for lead pastors, that's 18 months long. And really it is about being exposed to healthy churches and learning together, but also being together and growing together. That happens over 18 months. This week we all spend a whole weekend, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday together again for our second meetup. And then we do one for younger leaders called the Emerging Leaders Lab. It's a year long. And really we just identify 8 areas in the pastoral life that you need to spend your whole life growing in. And it's not, you can't get somebody formed in 1 year, but you could lay some tracks for a vision of lifelong learning. So that's what we're part of with the Pastorate. And it's a separate charity from the Way. And it's, you know, it's
If you're a pastor watching this right now, you have to download it, the Pastorate. I love it, Jake, because it's vulnerable and it's real and it's incredibly encouraging. Those podcasts, good job.
I just love pastors.
Yeah,
And it's sincere. I just think
Sincere.
they're my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Even before I was a Christian, I was like, I'd meet a pastor and be like, wow. And so I think one of the things I want to spend a lot of time doing is championing the cause of pastors. I just think that one of the big opportunities in our time will be pastors building a deep, deep life with God, really healthy households and families. And that will make a difference in the health of their church.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think communities can be healthier, like the cities around them. So that's really the vision we're going after.
So I want to ask you 2 questions, similar but different. In Thailand, they have a saying, same, but only different. So this is same, only different. Emerging leaders.
Yeah.
What have you learned that would help them? So I want you to look at that camera and say to emerging leaders, man, this is where you need to be. Same question to church planters. Church planters who are out there and working like you've worked, and different contexts, sure, but what have you learned that you could deposit into them briefly? But first, emerging leaders.
I think who you run with matters a lot. And to really run with people means opening up your life to people. It means being known by and knowing, and it will always mean working through the walls of insecurity or forgiveness or even hurt. So I think the best shot for me, this is really personal, like the thing that keeps me has always been the people I run with. That can be a constellation of relationships of close friends, mentors, guides, but finding those 1 or 2 brothers or sisters that you'll run with, that will know you confess your sin to. I got a text on Sunday after church from a dear friend in another province, and it was a voice note, and he just said how hard Sunday was. He said, this was one of the worst Sundays I've had. I've been doing this for 10 years with this church. And who are the people you can send that voice note to? So the people you run with, are they prayerful? Do they not take the ministry too seriously, but take you and God seriously? Like, who do you run with? That's number 1. Number 2 is, I think, building deep, deep, hidden life with God. And there's no shortcut to it. I just think so much of the things that take us out come from the insecurities around our identity, finding success in one thing or another. People will criticize you as a church leader. If I don't have people I can process that with, and then also a growing hidden life with God where I can ultimately find my identity, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two pieces: the people you run with, and that hidden life with God. And you asked about emerging leaders and church planners. I'll say it's like the best stuff God does is over time. And I know that even as we shared our stories, some of the stuff seems fast, but some of the stuff we longed for. I mean, in our relationship with neighbors in the neighborhood of Strathcona, I remember being so anxious. How will we not just be a pop-up church here, but actually? And 5 years in, I'm like, oh, I can see it now. The roots are going in, the proximity. And so just like this is hard for me. Patience is so hard for me, but God is he's doing so much more than we can see. Mm-hmm. And part of the task is just staying in him, staying in relationships. And then for church planters, I don't know, find a couple other church planters to commiserate with, pray for each other, have a good laugh at the funniest moments. Do you know we did an interest meeting here at CLA? A lot of things went well, but we did one here. We printed off brochures for at least 50 people. We got snacks for at least 50 people. 3 people came. There was 4 of us presenting. There was more presenters than attendees. It was like, and I just remember that moment. Like if I didn't have Jer and Chris there, like we laughed so hard. We're like, what are we going to do with all these 2-bite brownies? And that for me is there's going to be these incredibly, that's not the most depressing moment, but like depressing, defeating moments. To have a couple people to have a laugh with in those moments makes
beautiful, Jason.
All the difference. So that would be maybe what I'd pass along.
Yeah, great.
So great to have you at the Orange Pew.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, I want CLA to celebrate this. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that I really, really wanted you at the Orange Pew was to tell the story to CLA again. That the prayer, that the time, that the energy, that the people sent, that the financial investment. I mean, your story is amazing. The fruit of that seed. So I'm hoping, CLA, that you hear this and you're encouraged. And for those that are in the network, I want you to hear Jason's story and reach out. Please don't be alone in the pastorate, and know that there are others cheerleading you and supporting you and wanting you to succeed. And today we interviewed one of those people. So don't be alone in your endeavors. And to you, sir, thank you for coming.
Thank you guys.
Thank
you
being
so
faithful.
much, CLA, for being a home for me to grow. One of the hardest things about learning to preach and pastor is you do it in front of people. And I had my worst sermons and my worst pastoral moments in the safety of a very, very loving congregation here. And I'm so thankful to have grown here. I'm so thankful to have learned about pastoral ministry from both of you who pastor out of very different giftings. And that was a ministry to me to see how the pastoral vocation is expressed in unique wiring and calling. And then to be sent and blessed. I'm so, so thankful. I love this church, forever love this church. This is my wife's church. This is the only other church she's ever been to besides The Way. She grew up here and we met here, and I feel forever indebted. So thank you. Is it
theway.com? Is that the website?
Thewaychurch.ca.
Thewaychurch.ca. Listen, CLA, go to the website. Are your leaders on there? Like, do you have, is that on the space there?
Everything's there. And then if you want to find out about the pastorate, thepastorate.ca, or on social media.
Go there, find the leadership team, and pray for the leaders of this growing, lovely, beautiful expression of the kingdom. Thanks for being here, Jay.
Expression in Vancouver.
They
said it couldn't be done, but you did it. Now here's your gift.
This is why I came.
This is why you came. You could eat one of those fake oranges,
no, I want
you could have
the
chocolate orange. And
my son Hudson was like, "Are you going to wear orange for the Orange Pew?" That's what he said.
Or you could pass the orange on to your son. beautiful kids.
Thanks,
and,
Jay.
Thanks for being
for
here.
having
Thank you, Jason.
CLA and our network, thank you for joining us. We hope that you join us next month, the month of April, where I've already mentioned we're gonna interview Matt Bender, and it's gonna be amazing. So come and join us. Have an amazing spring break, CLA.
Amen. We love you, CLA.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Orange Pew. To stay up to date, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube podcasts. We'll see you next time.